A few weeks after the narrative of COVID-19 began to reach fever pitch, the first video that I made on the topic, I expressed an element of skepticism. And the reason for that, of course, was there was a clip which I included in that first video of a woman on Politics Scotland talking about certain industries that probably wouldn't recover come the end of this so-called crisis. Those industries, of course, being oil and gas. Immediately my skepticism was somewhat perked by the fact that, by the fact that for the best part of 2019 we heard to no end about the so-called climate crisis. Nicola Sturgeon was partying up to no end. We had the goddess Greta Thunberg doing the same thing. We had children protesting, twisting Thin-Lips' arm, of course. You know, they preach about what they learn in their textbooks and Sturgeon gets to play the role of, oh, you twisted my arm, you know. And here we are a year later, a so-called crisis, a so-called pandemic, and the two key industries that the climate gurus were attacking non-stop. All of a sudden, these two industries are in jeopardy of not being able to recover. And as time has moved on, it's becoming ever more apparent that there is an element of sustainable development goal activity in and around this lockdown. The decade of action, as I have covered to no end, the video that I made in January, if you recall, where I titled Nicola Sturgeon Ushering in Agenda 2030. That was my first video on this, and it included the fat chief Antonio Guterres talking about the decade of action. And here we are, here we are. So it says here, just for recap, building a fairer Scotland with well-being at its heart. We take this into consideration where it says here, as I've highlighted, as we recover and rebuild, we must not return to the way things were. Not that we can't go back to the way things were. No, we must not. That suggests that they don't want to go back to the way things were. You see? And another quote in this very same article suggests something similar. Our new normal must deliver a better way of living for everyone, one that also protects our environment, as our fortunes are bound to the health of our planet. This sounds rather climate guru-esque, don't you think? But the fact is they're talking about the new normal, which initially was about adapting to live alongside a virus, all of a sudden has been redefined, unbeknownst to the public, to now talk about a society change or a redirection for Scotland to encompass protection of the environment, social justice, namby-pamby inclusion, that type of thing. It also says, as we begin the road to recovery from this pandemic and securing a brighter future for Scotland, our focus must be on building something better than our old normal. So these three things combined, with the top quote talking about we must not return to normal. Not we can't, we must. And here we have them talking about, fairer, greener Scotland, all that type of thing. We combine that with the fact that oil and gas prices are plummeting and COVID-19 conveniently has been blamed for such a feat, is leading now to suggestions of having to find an alternative. The suggestion is that COVID-19 has crippled these industries, so we need to find an alternative. We've got no other choice. How very convenient, if you ask me, especially when you take into consideration the fact that Sustainable Development Goal 13 is climate action, and the fact that Scotland is part of the Sustainable Development regime. Scotland must be a world leader in championing and delivering the Sustainable Development Goals that Nicola Sturgeon signed us up to in 2015, unbeknownst to the public as per usual. And just a reminder that the Decade of Action calls for accelerating sustainable solutions to all the world's biggest challenges, ranging from poverty, gender, to climate change, inequality, and closing the finance gap. Redistribution of wealth, representation for the Browns, that type of thing. But climate change, especially. So, the article that I covered, the video that I put on YouTube the other day, but I made a week ago on BitChute, from Fiona Hislop, where she said, amongst other things, this is about an economy that benefits all. And if you also look at things like climate change and the need for inclusive growth, that has to be the benefit of everyone. Now, the rethinking globally of supply chains that are disrupted, the rethinking of domestic sustainability of supply chains and manufacturing, these are happening on a global scale. Resilience will ensure that we don't have a pandemic in the future. And if we can do the step change, for example, in terms of home working, which will absolutely be the central way of working and will be for some time to come, then we can make some of the big changes, for example, in transport that we knew we wanted to do as part of that well-being net zero economy. We must and we want. I think the crisis has focused minds, and I think it's accelerated a lot of the thinking and also the practice of what we wanted to do in terms of a well-being economy. I've covered in the past numerous quotes and even the video of Thin Lips in Parliament talking about the fact that many of the things they wanted to do prior have fallen into their lap because of this so-called crisis. Now, some may argue that this crisis has been manufactured in order for them to bring about the changes that they had already premeditated, so to speak. But people just can't seem to see that. She then says, tackling the climate change emergency, which requires the phasing out of oil and gas, and the biodiversity emergency. Change is always difficult, and sometimes, unfortunately, in very tragic circumstances, the catalyst for an economic change has been born out of a very, very terrible tragedy. How very convenient. How very convenient. So bear in mind, before I go any further, the fact that we must not go back to an old normal. And quotes like that where she refers to, as well, Sturgeon, that this crisis has brought about the opportunity to move in a different direction. And then also the fact that this so-called crisis has completely butchered the oil and gas sectors, leaving us with no choice but to become a green, fair and namby-pamby society. Not to mention the fact that unemployment is skyrocketing. Not to mention the fact that Scotland's about to be butchered by a recession. Not to mention the fact that we're being hit pretty damn hard in that department. And what are they talking about? A well-being economy. It's socialism. It's their socialist utopia, so to speak, coming into effect slowly but surely. They're a bunch of socialists in charge of a capitalist society. Anyhow.
In the last few months, we have sacrificed so much to protect and support one another. Together we're tackling COVID-19, but now it's time to work together on recovery. For our part, the SNP will work tirelessly to protect jobs, to support businesses, and to invest in the industries of the future.
Invest in the industries of the future. Oil and gas will no longer be a thing. It will all be about greenery. The green revolution.
We've already started by investing £230 million in a return to work package to invest in jobs across the country, as well as supporting industries that have been hard hit, like the oil and gas, to transition to green energy. We're all
yeah, they're investing. They've been hit hard, so they're investing to get them to transition.
Also providing as much certainty as we can so that businesses know when it's safe to reopen. And when it is safe to reopen, we need your help to get Scotland back up and running again. Every purchase you make will help to keep people employed, puts money back in people's pockets, and helps to get our communities again. Our new recovery campaign aims to provide as much information and guidance as possible. You'll discover the help available for businesses, and you'll also find support and learn about all the exciting upskilling, retraining and career opportunities for everybody. We can all help Scotland recover from the impacts of COVID-19. So let's get on with building a more resilient, sustainable country that's
sustainable country, folks. A fairer, more sustainable, resilient country. This bullshit about creating a country that will be able to withstand any future pandemics. Or like this councillor here says, societies must be prepared for profound and predictable climate change shock, warns a Perth conference. And it says here that however, if societies want to avoid a more profound and predictable climate non-existent crisis, then the time for talking is over and a more sustainable path must be taken. Of course. The event was imbued with optimism as it focused on what can be done and offered strong support for the principle that all efforts at rebuilding our economies must also help prepare for and minimise the impact of any future climate crisis. This was a clear call for urgent action, for long-term thinking and for strategic application of funding, ensuring that the money being spent now to solve coronavirus does not exacerbate the climate crisis, quote, quote, and help make businesses, society and the environment more robust. Some of the people that were involved in this, of course, were a dozen chief executives, representatives from the likes of the Scottish Government, and go figure, the Scottish Council for Development and Industry, the Institute of Directors, Scottish Enterprise, plus a range of other public bodies, energy companies, universities, etc. Some of the key voices that presented provocations during the meeting were Andy Cave, Head of Governance and Sustainability, and Barbara Morton, the Director of Sustainable Procurement Limited. And she wasn't the only one talking about sustainability. We had Chipcake Hislop, but for the purpose of keeping the video a relatively reasonable time, I'm not going to play it, but together we will build a more sustainable, resilient and fairer country. Sustainable country.